Good morning, year six, or good afternoon, year six, year three, sorry. Hi, year three. I hope you're well. Today in our history lesson, we're going to be thinking about the information we learned from artifacts and sculptures, and we'll learn a little bit more about what those words mean as we go through this lesson. We're going to be learning about what we can learn about Egyptians and the ancient Egyptians from these items. So to begin with, guys, we're going to think how we'll be successful. And the way we'll be successful is we can identify those different artifacts from ancient Egypt. We consider what those artifacts are, what those jobs of those artifacts would have been at the time. And finally, we can record what those would have showed us. Okay, a little bit of a recall now. Incorrect or correct about Tutankhamun. So we looked at the boy king. We looked at King Tut last week. Are we true or are we false with these statements? Okay, so did he have a club foot and did he own over 100 walking sticks, do we think? Did he meet Howard Carter in 1921? Is it true that no one knows exactly why he died so young? Is it true that he has the smallest tomb in the Valley of the Kings? And is it true that he had 4 children? What do you think? Which ones are true? Which ones are false? Which ones are correct? Which ones are incorrect? Pause the video while you try and complete that on your sheet and see how you've done. Okay, and then coming back in. So pause and then coming back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okie dokie. Let's see how we've done then. So, he had a club foot. It is correct. Okay, so he had that ailment with his feet, which and it was hard for him to walk. And it's one of those theories about why he might have died so young is due to the fact that he had this injury that therefore led to him getting quite a lot of infections. He didn't meet Howard Carter in 1921. Howard Carter dug his tomb up in 1922, but Tutankhamun had by that point been dead for about 3,500 years, so they didn't meet. It would have been a strange meeting if they had. Hello, I'm Howard Carter. And Tutankhamun would have said nothing because although he was dressed as a mummy and although he had his death mask on, he couldn't speak because he'd been dead for more than 3 millennia. Okay, so Howard Carter did not meet him in 1921. Howard Carter did dig him up in 1922, however. It's true that no one knows exactly why he died so young. If you remember from last week, as well as the idea that his club foot might have been a cause, there was also the idea that malaria could have played a factor and he might have got weak through multiple other infections. He may even have been killed by one of his viziers or somebody who might have decided that they wanted to be king and the ruler of the Egyptians instead. He has the smallest tomb in the Valley of the Kings, and many people felt that that was why his tomb was left untouched, if you remember. All the other tombs were robbed and delved into much before 1922 when Howard Carter uncovered the tomb that was resided in by the body of Tutankhamun and his treasures. It's not true, however, that he had 4 children. He only had 2 children, both who died very young. I mean, he was only 18 himself when he died, but his children died in birth. And then they were wrapped in mummification process and stored, or they were preserved within his tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Right, guys, a word that I said we were going to look at today then is artifacts. It's one of our key points today to think about what we can learn about the Egyptians from artifacts and sculptures. So it's important we understand what artifacts are. Many of you will have an idea, and hopefully this will just make it a little bit clearer what that idea is and how to be correct. An artifact is an object that's made by a human being. So it's something that somebody's made. And normally, so typically, it's one of cultural or historical interest. Okay, so maybe in 1,000 years, if somebody digs up my house or my tomb and they find one of these pens, they might find it interesting. But to be honest, I doubt it. I mean, it's tricky because we can't predict what would be an interesting artifact, because maybe this would show people that people highlighted when they were doing work. Maybe it'd show people how they've made ink come out of the nib of a pen. Maybe it'd show people lots of things. Maybe it'd explain to people how plastic had been made. You never know. I imagine it won't be the only pen that resides 1,000 years from now and therefore is a unique artifact. However, it might be. But artifacts are these things, such as a pen, that's made by humans, and they tell the finder, tell the historians who find them something about the history and the events that happened around that time, or the culture of that time. So it might be a pot, might be a pan to teach people, show people how people cooked. It might be an image to show people what kind of gods people respected. It might be an element of a house which shows how people lived in their houses. It might be an element of a shoe to show the type of shoes that people needed, and how they could have moved. There's lots of different things artifacts could be. Normally they're made by people and they show somebody something about culture and the history of the time. Artifact stems from arti, by skill, and fact, something made. So something's been made, artifactum. Okay, and you can see various artifacts there. Now, the bones themselves we wouldn't consider artifacts, but some of the other things within a museum might be artifacts because they're made by people. Evidence or an object. I found it tricky to think of antonyms, so I thought of chatter, guess. So artifacts are something that are the evidence that show historians why they might make the suggestions about the past that they do. They're not guesswork. They're something that can inform estimates and ideas. Some historians were unable to see the artifacts as the museum was closed. Might be a way that we could use that in a sentence. Now, one of these were artifacts from the Egyptian time was the Canopic jars. They were used as part of the process by which dead beings were mummified, were wrapped and stored, and that basically all your organs, your heart, your lungs, your things, were taken out of your body, and they were stored within those jars, and they were then stored within the tomb with the person who had been mummified. Okay. Now, on those jars, there were 4 different representations of gods normally. I'm not going to try and say this first one very well. I'll give it a go though. Quebenhensenuf, the falcon-headed god. Then there's the Happy, the baboon-headed god, looking after the lungs. The Duametef, the jackal-headed goth, and then the Imseti, the human-headed goth, looking after the lizard. Now, if we thought that Tutankhamun had died because of an issue of his intestines, we would have looked in the first jar. If we thought it was his stomach, we would have looked in the third jar. So if we were trying to investigate what had killed him so young, then we may maybe have looked in those canopic jars. And this is what they look like, those canopic jars, this type of thing. So the 4 different heads. And there's a makeup palette. As early as 4000 BC, so 6,000 years ago, people in Egypt used materials to color their skin. Okay, some of these common cosmetics used copper, so the green makeup around the eye. I'm not going to show you by putting any on because I think I've got to go to the shop later, and I don't know if they'd serve me if I was wearing my makeup because I look very strange when I do. And as well as that, guys, sorry, I'm just going to try and move that picture. You can also see that there's coal, which is this stick, okay, and then there's a galena, which is this black paint. So there's lots of different types of makeup. The black paint, the galena, is really interesting because it stopped eyes getting reflections from the sun. And even now in America, people who play American football, so you might see them with their big helmets on, they're throwing the ball around. Now, what they wear sometimes, and batsmen in cricket do as well, they wear black colouring or dark colouring under their eyes to stop the reflection from the sun, inhibiting their ability to see during the game. Sometimes as well, ochre was used as a red colouring for lip colouring or to go around your cheeks. And then henna, some people still use now to colour as part of celebrations and commemorations linked to religious. And people use henna then. So lots of different types of makeup was used. And you might see an artifact such as the one that's in the picture there. Chadoof is a really interesting thing, and I'm going to try and encourage whoever's teaching you for history when you return for you to maybe make a Chadoof, because a Chadoof is this device which will enable people to lift water, and they're still used in some countries such as India and Egypt, and they allow people to irrigate, which means to water land. Okay, it consists of this long pole, which is a little like a seesaw, and the idea with the pole is that the pole has something on the end of it, and the pole has something on the end of it, which then drops down into the water and lifts water up. Okay, lifts water up. So it's like a seesaw. Something pushes down here and lifts up the other end. Okay, and the idea with that is then if you couldn't reach the water, such as the Nile, by hand or with your bucket, you could put your Chadoof so it loops down into there, and then you get your water out like that. It's a little bit like a seesaw. It's a clever idea. Sometimes you might have lots of Chadoofs next to each other, and gradually then the water could get to a higher level than you were initially able to meet. So like a little bit like a chain of Chadoofs. Here's a picture of a Chadoof, and you can see with this one, we've got this person from, it's kind of a model, isn't it? But you can see that the bucket is being lowered into the water, and then where I am, if I move myself, you can see the weight there. So where I'm circling now above my head, there's the weight, and that weight allows somebody to pick up more water from the Nile or from wherever they're grabbing the water from than they would otherwise be able to do. And you need that weight, and then then allows you to get that water when otherwise you wouldn't be able to access it or carry it. Okay, so that's a Chadoof. Then amulets these were believed to have certain special properties that people might think they might bestow. They're almost like a lucky charm. In ancient Egypt, people felt that these were had magical purposes for lots of reasons. So their shape, what they look like, their decoration, what was written on them, the color, the material. All these things made them specially special and magic. And they were worn or placed on the body to transfer these powers to your owner. Okay, so whoever had them, like a necklace or something, they might suddenly have special powers, was the idea. Sometimes there are animals, gods, which is synonymous with deities, symbols, lots of things that they could have shown. And here we go. Here's a picture of some amulets. And these kind of things would represent things to people. Still today, we kind of think of lucky charms or something like these, so that people wear, it might give them good fortune, good luck, or people believe that. Now, an obelisk is another artifact, human-made point, which is found. These are huge sometimes, but sometimes not as large. But these are rectangular pillars which have a tapered top. There's one near where my mum and dad live, so I see one sometimes. But sometimes they're not that old. These ones that we think of in ancient Egypt are more than 3,000 years old. The obelisks of ancient Egypt represented the benben, which are these. Which was where they believed that this god Atum stood when they believed that the world was created. They were positioned in, lots of them were made, they were positioned to honor the god, as well as the sun god as well. So honor multiple gods, because the ancient Egyptians believed in lots of gods, and we will look at those in due course. There's only one that's still standing in its original position, which is in Sinruset, which is a former temple to the sun god at Heliopolis. Okay, lots of them were moved and transferred to Italy by the Romans when they took over at the end of the Egyptian Empire. Okay, and we've got that idea there. So this is an example as one of those obelisks. Sphinx then as well, the Sphinx of Giza, commonly referred to as Sphinx of Giza or just the Sphinx. It's a limestone statue, and it faces directly from west to the east, and on it is believed to be the pharaoh Khafra, which is one of the other pharaohs, as well as Tutankhamun. It's really tall, so it's about 20 meters high, so that's like 10 or 11 of me high, maybe about 15 of you high, and it's really wide, so it's about 70 meters from the front to the back. It's the oldest thing in Egypt, okay, so it shows us a lot about Egypt, and here's an example of that Sphinx, the Great Sphinx of Giza. Right, guys, the last artifact that we're going to think about is the Rosetta Stone. It's broken into 3 stones. Within it has 3 types of writing. The writing is an official message called a decree about the king, Ptolemy V, and the decree was copied onto the last stone stabs. And it's really important because the Rosetta Stone is one of the first ways that people were able to translate what had been written, because you could link the different types of writing to what was written in the other types. So there's 3 languages there, and because there's 3 languages, you could see that if they were saying the same thing, you could start to match what each one was saying, and you could learn more than one language, even if you could only read one language yourself. So if in this bottom part, if it said something about strawberries, for example, and it says strawberries in the second language here, you then would know the word for strawberries. That's a simple example. Okay, it's really important in the development of understanding of writing. Okay, that's the Rosetta Stone. Right, guys, I saw some marvelous masks last week, so thank you, Demi. That's you, and thank you. I think that was Rebecca. Guys, I can't remember everybody's name in year 3. I'm sorry, but they were brilliant, guys. Thank you so much for those. Now, what I'd like you to do today in your writing is think about an image of an artifact. So, for example, here we've got our Canopic jars. Then what you do is you'd fill in the name of it. Then you think about what it did. So it stored internal organs of the person. And then you think about what it showed us. Now, that would show how important the afterlife was to ancient Egyptians. That's an example of the type of writing you're going to do today. You're going to add the pictures for you're going to add the names for the artifacts on the picture. So next to the artifact image, you're going to write down the name of it, and then you're going to write what it did, so what its purpose was, and what it shows us. So that's where you've got to be a bit of an inferential historian. What does the Chadoof show us? Does that show us it was easy to get water or hard? What does the obelisk show us? Did they like the sun god? Did they respect the sun god? What does the Rosetta Stone, this bottom one, show? Were they keen to learn how to write in other languages or not? What does it show us? Okay, so you've got to think about those. Thank you very much for your attention today, guys. This might be your last history lesson with me, but I've loved teaching you, and I've been so impressed by your work. Thank you very much for sending it all in. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.